So hello and welcome to the 2021 Faith and Film Festival. My name is Jake Wampfler. I'm a pastor here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And more importantly, I'm also the co-creator of this Faith and Film Festival. And today we have a very exciting opportunity to talk to somebody that's very special in this second year of the Faith and Film Festival. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce to you some important people that are joining me. So joining me first and foremost is creative director at Pathfinder Church, Seth Hins. Welcome, Seth. And just say a little bit about yourself as we get started.
Sure. Thanks, Jake. I grew up in Michigan. I'm a pastor's kid, but I've been in church communication for 12 years now, working with universities and across the country, just trying to help Lutheran Church get the word out there. So this is just an awesome opportunity here.
Awesome. Thanks, Seth. And thanks for being here. Seth has a very cool and interesting connection to this interview, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Also joining us is the wonderful, lovely Abby Olchesi, Kansas City-based film critic and writer. Abby, welcome, and say a little bit about yourself.
Hi, it's so good to be back for the 2021 edition of the Faith and Film Festival. I'm really glad that I get to do this again. I am a writer and film critic based in Kansas City, as you mentioned. I am the film editor for The Pitch magazine, which is an alt monthly based here in Kansas City. And I also do a lot of freelance writing all over the internet. Probably most pertinent to this festival, I do some writing for Sojourners and also for a website called Think Christian, which looks at entertainment and, in my case, film from a kind of fairly progressive Christian angle.
Yeah, awesome. And I just on a personal note, I have to say that I appreciate Abby so much. I read one of her pieces in Sojourners as we were getting this festival started over a year ago. And I sent her a message on Facebook and said, hey, I just read your stuff. You don't know who I am. Would you like to be part of this film festival? It doesn't even exist yet. And she said yes. And so I really appreciate her just following the nudge of the Spirit and being part of this, and certainly love to welcome her back to the festival this year. So thanks for being here, Abby.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then finally, a man who probably needs very little to no introduction is actor Paul Walter Hauser. And before I kick it to you, Paul, I just want to list off some of your credits. And being a cinephile myself, I just want to list off the directors of these films that you've worked with already. So Paul has starred in films such as I, Tonya from Craig Gillespie, Black Klansman, and Da 5 Bloods from Spike Lee, and his probably biggest role to date, Richard Jewell, directed by Clint Eastwood. So Paul Walter Hauser, welcome to the Faith and Film Festival. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me at Triple F. Big fan of what you guys are doing here, which would make me a fan of the Faith and Film Festival. That's quadruple F. And I hope this is one of many years I get to partake. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul. I told Seth and Abby earlier this week, and I've told them multiple times, and pretty much anybody that will even stand to listen to me for 5 seconds, that I never would have imagined in my wildest dreams that in the second year of this festival that we would have Paul Walter Hauser joining us. It's just an incredible honor. It's an incredible blessing to have you here to share your story about acting, your story about your journey to Hollywood, but also to share yourself with us as a human being and as a child of God as well. So that is really such an important part of the Faith and Film Festival, is really how we see our lives interacting with the story of Jesus and our lives as well in these films that we're watching. And I just watched Richard Jewell last night again, and just continue to be amazed by, how we can even see our story in that story and the greater story of Jesus as well. So with that being said, I am going to really spend very little time talking for the rest of this interview. And that's by design, because Seth, you have a very interesting relationship with Paul, and I'd like to kick it to you to explain how in the world this interview came to be in the first place. So Seth, I'd like for you to kind of share that with us, and Paul, obviously, feel free to jump in with Seth where you feel appropriate.
Oh, I will. I'm going to fix whatever revisionist history might be getting me in trouble. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Paul, for being here. It's really pretty quick. I've known Paul a long time. Went to the first Faith and Film Festival and got to meet Jake, and I got to meet Heather Davis. So I've known her for a little bit longer than that. And just conversations about creativity, artistry, film, thinking about that, and then thinking also the intersection of Christianity, conversations just flow. And then it came up that we grew up with Paul. And it kind of led to, I think, Heather feeling nudged by the Spirit to reach out to me and to see if Paul might be interested. And praise God, he was available and able to make this connection. And so we were able to make it happen. So long story short, that was it. So
I would chime in to say that Seth, and I don't know if he realizes it or not, but probably not. He's a pretty humble guy, and he's too busy nowadays to think about all this. But when we were, kids or teenagers rather, I was about 14 years old before I got into high school, 13, 14, and Seth was 4 years older than me. So when I was 13, he was 17, or 14 and he was 18, he would let me hang out with him and his friends. Like it was not a big deal, even though I wasn't even in high school. And that sort of easy, nonchalant inclusion that he always bestowed upon me and other people my age was a really big deal in building my confidence, to get to hang out with older kids. And then pairing that with the fact that Seth was a Christian who actually lived his faith out and, wasn't punching down on his humor or trying to hurt other people, the way we say thoughtless, horrific things when we're teenagers. So Seth was kind of a role model in the sense of behaviorally and spiritually, but then also he introduced me to musicians like Ben Queller, or movies like Swingers and Bottle Rocket, the Wes Anderson directorial debut. He was also weirdly an influential person when it came to entertainment and media for me, where I started to watch things or listen to things I never would have normally partaken in. So partook, is that the word? But yeah, so Seth was this surrogate older brother for a few years for me, and now I'm such a huge fan of Wes Anderson. I never would have known unless the Hins boys rallied me in their home at midnight with a box of pizza, showing me Rushmore and Bottle Rocket. So I'm grateful for all that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. That's great. Yeah. Paul and I grew up, we in Michigan, right in the smack dab middle of Michigan. Paul, it couldn't get any more different from where you are now, probably. But could you take us back a little bit about growing up in Michigan? Talk about Hemlock,
Sure.
Tri-Cities, all that good stuff.
Yeah, where I grew up, it's so funny. I don't think you grow up in a small town when you're in it, because it's close to you and you're young and everything is bigger than you. And so, to me, Saginaw may as well have been Chicago, the way I felt growing up in it. But as I ventured out later in life, even in my early 20s, I realized I think I come from a small town where, you run into people at the grocery store all the time. Everybody kind of peripherally knows everybody's business, unfortunately. Yeah, my dad's a pastor, just like Seth's. We're PKs, and my dad took a job in a farm town about 15, 20 miles maybe from Saginaw. And when I was 13, 14 years old, about 13, we moved out to this farm town. And my big connection to the city, that I say the city like it's so far away, but the 25-minute drive, which was arduous for my poor friends to pick me up and drop me off all the time. That my main connection to my hometown was the Hins family. And so our big thing was we loved making little short films and skits and videos. We didn't have the iPhone back then, but we did have a $200-$400 JVC camera from Best Buy. And I think I was, Seth was more on the writing side, and he was really into like screenwriting, and we bonded on that. But I was the one who was constantly pushing the envelope to make everybody make movies, even when they didn't want to. It was kind of like this weird understood assumption that if you're hanging out with Paul, you might have to make a short film or something.
Yeah.
Which is weird, but also it's exactly who I am, for better or for worse. So yeah, it was a lot of like small town, but dreaming big, So I would tell all my friends, like, why shouldn't we be on Saturday Night Live? Why shouldn't we be like Johnny Knoxville and his, Jackass crew? Why shouldn't we try to make a movie and get it into a film festival? Like, I never thought it was impossible. I always just assumed that if you put in the work ethic, blended with some form of love and talent, you were going to get a good outcome. So yeah, I was very driven at a young age, trying to utilize all these free locations and friends and family members as actors. Sometimes like a friend or family member would be actually really good at acting, and you'd get a funny moment from my mom or Seth's mom on camera doing like a cameo, and they nail it. And, those moments are really fun and really memorable. And I think I carry that same enthusiasm and hopefulness today, where I life has hurt me, as it does all of us, but I don't think I've lost the playfulness and the belief in all this stuff. It's still that fruit's still very ripe on the tree for me. And it all began in Saginaw, Michigan. Yeah.
That's right.
That's awesome. So now that you've started talking about like the short films and things that you would make growing up, I wonder, was there like a particular movie that or thing that you watched that made you kind of have that spark of creativity, or something that really inspired you when you were young?
Yeah, it's so fun. This is such like a weird like bullet to pull out of the chamber right now. But I'll just show you this tattoo I just got on my arm. It's of these names. You know that Helvetica font T-shirt that says, Joey and Chandler and Ross and Rachel. I got one of my 6 guys that kind of influenced me coming up as a youngster who loved comedy, and it was Martin Short, Daniel Stern, Chris Farley, Jim Varney, aka Ernest of the Ernest movies, Jim Carrey, and Robin Williams. So, that was kind of my entry into, I love making people laugh. Okay, is there anything better than making my parents laugh or my siblings laugh? So it was all about humor between the ages of maybe 5 and 10 or 11. But around the time I was 11, 12 years old, I think I saw a couple movies that really changed my focus of what I thought entertainment could be. And weirdly enough, they're both Jack Nicholson movies. One of them was As Good as It Gets, which, I was sharp enough as a youngster I could pick up on all the jokes at 12 years old. And then the other one was A Few Good Men, which I'm not even sure I understood. Sorkin dialogue to an 11, 12-year-old probably isn't all there. I can't take credit for being that sharp. But I loved the head-buttedness of Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. And I believed, both now as an adult and especially when I was younger, I believed those guys hated each other and were at war. And I wanted to know why and how they did it so convincingly. And so that kind of propelled me around 11, 12 years old to want to do drama too. As far as my videos, I'm not about to ask my guy friends to do Macbeth on our back porch, but that was more the time where we would try to impersonate, Steve-O and the guys from MTV. And it was like, well, let's put a firecracker in the zipper of your, trousers and see what happens. It was literally as simple-minded and dangerous as that. And then other times it was trying to do like, a spoof on The Real World, where we're all just sitting around a house complaining and yelling at each other. Like, it wasn't very brilliant, but it was definitely me wanting to see like where is the brilliance. I'm not doing it because it's brilliant. I'm doing it to find the pieces of the brilliance. And a lot of them were often Seth's brother, Peter, where Peter was just this guy where you put the camera on him and you let him go and you didn't know what you were going to get. He was the most unpredictable comedic voice of our group of friends. And he could get everybody. And what we loved about Peter too is the fact that when people outside of our group didn't get his humor, we loved it because it just validated our weird sense of humor. And then we looked at that person like, yeah, Brandon's an idiot. He doesn't even get Peter Hins's humor. Like, so that was kind of the fun too, is we discovered people's voices from doing those videos. And it was really influential to us as kind of understanding our own voices too, I think, in a weird way.
Absolutely. So Paul, let me go back to that. Let's talk about the lounge, and then maybe talk a little bit about, maybe pick out one of those sketch videos that you guys did that you felt like maybe we're onto something here. You know, maybe we've got something like that just surprised you when it was completed.
Yeah. So one of these things we did was me, Peter, James, I think their Seth's sister, Rachel, and somebody else, we were like wanting to start like this, like a clubhouse or something, like a little frat house where we were like, where can we watch movies and hang out and play video games? So we started on their deck or their porch, but eventually moved to the garage, and we turned their entire garage into this, like, you know, hodgepodge, like home theater where we would play video games, watch movies. There was this giant bench, and we put a couch on top of the bench and would have to climb up to sit on it. And we called it stadium seating. And we were so obsessed with this idea of having our own place to create and watch all these things. The movies on rotation at that time were, I believe, like Donnie Darko, The Outsiders, any comedy with like Owen Wilson or Will Ferrell, and then like random movies that people would be really passionate about. Like I remember some of the guys were really into this movie, The Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was the made-for-TV movie with Anthony Michael Hall and Noah Wiley about the computer wars between Microsoft and Apple.
Still the best work on Jobs. Still. It's so good.
It literally probably is, which sounds like we're being like facetious, but like I genuinely think it is. Although I was in a movie called I, Steve with Justin Long playing Steve Jobs, which is a close second. But yeah, no, we were just obsessed with consuming entertainment while the rest of our guy friends were hanging out with young women and having the time of their lives. We were very masculine focused on just bonding and watching stuff. I think when we made stuff, it was oftentimes forgettable and silly. You know, lip syncing and doing music videos in their living room. That kind of stuff was pretty far from brilliance. But I think what was good was, you know, we had this character called the landlord that Seth's brother Peter played. We just created this weird story about a guy who's very lonely and troubled, and these guys come to stay and rent a room in his house, and they discover that he's like doing all this creepy, nefarious stuff. But what's funny is, like, once again, like the content was silly, but the idea was actually kind of interesting. What if this recluse, weird guy let 3 young men rent out this room in his house, and what if they had to coexist, and what if they found out stuff about him that made them not want to live there? Like, it was actually kind of a brilliant dark comedy concept that we ran with, and we made like a sequel to the movie too. But that was, to me, that was like us coming on to something, because once again, when you're young, you're trying to find your voice. Like, I remember I showed Adam McKay, the director of, you know, Vice and The Big Short and Anchorman. Back in the day when I was like 20 years old, I handed him a DVD of my sketch comedy troupe from Saginaw. And some of the skits featured those guys from the lounge, the guys from our group. And I remember him watching it and like writing a note back to me on the internet saying like, yeah, I watched your stuff. Some of it was good, but I thought it lacked a voice. Like I didn't know what the voice was. And that was hard for me to take at that time. You know, I'm 20 years old. I'm dying for him to validate us and our work. But he was being honest, and I really appreciate that, because he was saying, you know, you can tell it's a hodgepodge and not a voice. Kids in the Hall out of Canada with Lorne Michaels back in the day, they were a group, but there was still a comedic voice coming out of all people. So, you know, that was something I had to learn and go off on my own and discover that, you know, comedy has a voice. And I did stand-up comedy for a decade, like maybe 12 years off and on. I did stand-up in LA, Michigan, Chicago, all over. And what I realized is I was good at performing, but I didn't have a voice. You know, Dave Chappelle has a very distinct voice. John Mulaney has a very distinct voice. Sarah Silverman, I didn't. So there's been a lot of painful trial and error from youth until now, where I've had to discover what my voice is, and it takes a while, you know. And I would say to anyone watching, you know, play with that. You know, don't let too many cooks in your own kitchen. You do have to find your own voice and sort of be able to identify what makes you tick, or what makes you funny, you know.
Yeah, I'd say that the same is true in writing as well. Like, it took me a really long time to figure out what your angle is, basically, and doing the thing that you really want to do.
Well, because early on, when we're writing, aren't we all just kind of miming whatever we like? Like,
oh, absolutely.
We've seen, like,
yeah, I can look at my
thing where they're. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, it's just I was going to say, I can look at my old stuff and be like, yeah, this is when I was trying to sound like this person. This is when I was trying to sound like this person, and it didn't really work.
No, it never does. I mean, it's good to get that out of your system, but there's a lot of young Tarantinos that think you can have a story because there's a gun on the table.
Right.
And, that's not really true, you know?
Yeah. So when you were talking about, like, it sounds pretty enviable, honestly, growing up garage theater setup.
It was.
I wanted to ask a little bit about, like, I feel like people who grow up in the church and love movies, it's like, as somebody who writes about this and now knows a lot of other people who do it too, I feel like when you get a group of us together in a room, we all have, like, similar stories, and realize, like, of just basically, like, learning what was okay to watch and what wasn't, and, like, trying to figure out, like, what you're gonna get in trouble for seeing, and then realizing as an adult that, like, the context is completely different. It almost kind of becomes like a support group, where it's like, oh, you too, huh? And I wondered if you had any struggles of your own growing up, trying to figure out the relationship between the stuff you love or want to love and being afraid of the consequences of engaging with secular stuff.
I love how, like, specific and sort of idiosyncratic that whole question even is. The idea of, well, it's the idea of subculture, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. It's like, if you know, you know.
There are some kids from different faith backgrounds who weren't allowed to dance. I knew these guys, this pair of brothers that worked at a coffee shop with me about 14, 15 years ago. And they told me that they basically got excommunicated from their church because they had a bunch of people from the church over at their house, and one or more people from the congregation took umbrage to the fact that the daughters were in dance classes. They owned rated R movies and owned guitars. And I was like, the Jesus you believe in sounds super boring.
Right.
Don't know what to tell you, but it's going to be tough to bring people to the faith if they can't watch Die Hard also. So, you know, some people were extreme. Thankfully, I didn't have that growing up. It wasn't overly restricted, but I would say it was interesting when I would go to the Hinz's house because they'd be able to watch The Simpsons. And, like, my parents were anti The Simpsons until I was like 14 or something.
It took a lot of work, Paul, to get to that level. So there's a lot of years and effort in before you got there.
Yeah, there was some of that, and like, you know, I think my parents, MTV in general, they thought was a wayward piece of entertainment that was a gateway drug to impure thoughts and stuff. So like there was some of that, but there was a turning point between 11 and 12 maybe, where in about 96, 97, 98, I started watching James L. Brooks and Rob Reiner, and even stuff like Sidney Lumet, or in that case Sorkin stuff. So that kind of weaned me off of it. I remember watching Titanic was this crazy thing, because when it came out, I was like 11 or 12, and it came in this big like double VHS sleeve, the size of a toddler's torso, this huge thing, and everybody owned that VHS. Every family owned it, and they kept telling me, well, you can't watch it. There's something in it that you can't watch. And I was like, I'm not afraid of the ship hitting the iceberg. Like, I can handle that. And I watched it, and of course there's a partially nude scene with Kate Winslet in the film. And then, as a youngster, you're like, well, I really like this movie. I don't feel like I should feel bad about that one moment. I really enjoy this movie. And also, sinfully as a kid, you can also be like, listen, I don't care about the painting. I'm a real big history buff. And then when people leave the room, you're like, where's the pause button? So, right. I mean, there's that thing of, media can be a sinful gateway drug to wayward thoughts and actions and words. So, it's tough, because I'm going to have kids someday. And when I do, you have to figure out where is the line. And part of that can also be children. Some kids are more precocious and intelligent than others. And that's also if your kid's being bullied and they're not maybe the sharpest tool in the shed, maybe don't show them The Matrix where Keanu's riddling people with bullets. Maybe they don't need to see that. Maybe that'll become therapeutic in a wayward sense. But if you have a hyper intelligent kid and they're like, I really want to watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I'd probably be like, yeah, sure. Like, I don't think this is going to screw you up. So it depends. For me, I was a very sensitive kid and very creative. So I'm actually super glad that I didn't grow up watching Freddy Krueger or, shoot 'em up stuff or sexual stuff. I think it would have messed with my head a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. To put a pin in it though, the best is when your pastor dad walks in at the one bad part in an otherwise blameless film. And for some reason that happened like clockwork. I mean, I had a joke when I did stand up back in the day where I was like, I don't know what it was with my dad, but if you were watching Fievel Goes West, suddenly he walks in, it's like Fievel Goes South, and the mice are all over each other. Like, it was just this idea of like, it happened in ways that didn't even seem possible. And it felt like this weird curse of, when dad walks in, the protagonist you adore is going to take the Lord's name in vain the second dad walks in.
Right.
Which was unfortunate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Paul, you talked about your dad a little bit there. You talked about growing up like that. So how do you think maybe, being a pastor's kid and growing up in the Lutheran church and the Lutheran schools, how did that help shape you, put the guardrails up, maybe, as you said, or just how did it help keep you on the right path and influence you?
Let me ask you that question first, and then I'll volley back.
Sure. So for me, it's having a dad who's a pastor, but also a mom who's just an excellent role model. Seeing them not only up in the pulpit, seeing my dad up there and preaching and leading this group of people, but then probably more importantly, seeing two Christian people, two parents of mine live a Christian life in a way that they get an hour up in front of church, but then it would be 3 hours in the narthex where you couldn't get the car to go home because we can't drive yet, and you'd be waiting for your dad to be done talking to people. And it's wrestling through that. And as a kid, it's really annoying. But then as you grow and you start to appreciate the fact that my parents, the people that are modeling the faith for me, have such an interest in other people and their stories. Yeah. And I think it just, for me, every day I'm learning and growing, and just becoming like, I aspire to that. And I think just that interest in other people is something that I just carry with me.
That's cool. That's very relatable for me too, obviously, because, you know, I think we did dart out of the church a little bit easier. I think mom and dad had separate cars, so it was like if dad's still talking, mom might sneak out and go to Bob Evans or something. Yeah, no, it was growing up in the Lutheran church and school system, that parochial structure. I think what was, you know, the number one thing is just the belief in God and the focus on what it means to live a life in some form of worship, whether it's the literal sense of music or it's how you treat other people. I think I wish they would have taught a little better. I mean, it's like talking about psychology now, but as a kid, you don't learn how to love yourself very well. You know how to be selfish, but you don't know how to practice self-love. But the onus is put on loving your neighbor and loving God, which is huge. We forget the second part of it: love your neighbor as yourself, which is interesting. But before I turn you guys into a therapy session, I think what is interesting is in that world, there's a big emphasis on community and having people to rally around during difficult times, having people to collaborate with in good times. And, you know, I think, yeah, the person I am now, I'm the type of guy who I constantly invite people to go to church with me. And I constantly try to cook for people or order pizza and have a meal and host people, even in my 2-bedroom apartment or 1-bedroom apartment. Like I have that spirit of wanting to encourage and wanting to have that sort of beautiful conviviality and inclusiveness. And I think I learned that from the church and school, for sure. I think the tough stuff for me was, you know, I'm not great with authority. Not that I don't adhere to authority the way we all must, whether it's a speed trap or whether it's, you know, a dress code when you're young or something. But like, I also felt a little bit of a rock and roll spirit of like, wanting to be my own person and not also play to the expectations of all other people. And I think in a way that was a good thing. And I wouldn't have had that in a public school setting. I wouldn't have had anything to rail against, or to kind of, even rail against might be too tough a term. I guess just test the waters and stuff. You know, I would usually try to find the line of appropriateness, and then I'm like, well, I'm going to dance on it, whether it's doing comedy or what I'm wearing or what I'm talking about. And once again, you don't want that to take on some negative form, but also self-expression is pretty healthy. And I sort of had to learn how to express myself in healthy ways, knowing that I was in a structure that didn't allow everything, you know.
I'd like to kind of jump off on that a little bit. You've kind of mentioned how you feel like your faith has sort of informed who you've become as an adult. And I wondered how that's informed the way that you approach your work and the way that you interact with people that you work with. I feel like there's kind of like in addition to that, there can be kind of a stereotype, I think, of certain ways that that Hollywood is. And I wondered if you have found that to be a unique worldview among folks you encounter.
It's so funny because there's sort of two extremes of this, to some degree. I think the one extreme that I don't agree with is Christian people in the world who think like, well, they're trying to take away Merry Christmas from us. Can't even say Merry Christmas to the guy at Home Depot when I'm going out to the parking lot. I don't believe there's a war on Christmas. I wouldn't go to that degree. Having said that, the other end of the spectrum I have seen too, of like, I'll mention I'm a Christian, and as Gene Shepard, the narrator of A Christmas Story, said, they looked at me as if I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. So there have been times where I've brought up my faith very nonchalantly and with ease, that kind of not ashamed of the gospelness. And I have gotten less than warm receptions from people in Hollywood. And and more so, liberal folks who feel threatened by Christianity in some way because they feel it's now so intermingled with the political realm. So yeah, I think that exists, but I just kind of do it like I really don't believe as Christians that we're trying to feed these people. I think the Holy Spirit feeds. The word does not return void. The word feeds. We're setting the table. We're not feeding, we're not force feeding and cutting people steak for them. That was never the idea, I don't think. So for me, it's about comfortably talking about it, showing how much I love Jesus, and creating a safe space for there to be conversation without judgment. Because if somebody doesn't feel safe or known or seen by you, they're going to feel a lot more like they're on a chopping block than a sofa. So you have to be careful how you set the table for the Holy Spirit. But I set it everywhere I go in the sense that there's this stand-up comedian I used to be friendly with. I don't see him anymore. I just haven't seen him in forever. This guy, James Adomian, who does these brilliant impersonations of
Oh yeah, he's great.
Jesse Ventura and Gary Busey. He's very funny. But James said that when he did stand-up in, say, Texas, he would do 15, 20 minutes and pull out the impressions and impersonations and really win the room over before he would drop the information bomb 18 minutes in to say that he's a gay man. And what does that do to Texans when they've already decided, hey, I think this guy's pretty funny, I'm enjoying his act, and then out of nowhere he says something that is antithetical to what they deem appropriate or good or whatever. And it kind of makes them, it forces them to think about it without force feeding it also. So I take the same approach with Christianity, not overly strategic, but I'm just going to be me, and you'll either like me or you won't anyway. And at some point, I'm going to drop the Jesus bomb, but I'm going to drop it pretty lightly and then hopefully invite you in to talk about it. So I've had famous actors ask me to go to lunch to talk about my faith because of what they heard me say on set or whatever at a party. I've had people text me and say, hey, could you pray for me? I'm not really a believer, but like I need prayer for this. So like those things have manifested and God's used them in big and small ways. And my hope is that once again, that I can just be representative of someone who doesn't live it perfectly, but lives it. Because guess what? You're not going to live it perfectly.
Right.
And those that purport to are the ones that all the liberals hate because they feel like they have to meet some unrealistic standard of life. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. So I really want to try to preach this concept of go to Jesus with all your baggage and all your crap and allow him to infuse discernment and spirited ideas that might change your life over time, because it's real tough to do it cold turkey. It's not super realistic.
Yeah.
That's great. Hey, Paul, you kind of talking about qualifying the called and all that. If you could, just real quick. So as you were growing up and getting into acting and all that, in what ways did God reveal to you and kind of direct your life? Like, yes, and confirm along the way, like, this is the path. This is where I want you going. This is what I'm calling you to do.
The Spirit kind of showed up just when you said that, as if to say, are they talking about me? Wow. Sorry, that was a moment for me. I think where there wasn't confirmation of things, there was always inspiration. And so that's a bit of a healthy beginning of knowing if you enjoy something and you're inspired to continually do it, that in and of itself is some form of evidence, I suppose, that you're led to that. But I still think doors were opened for me, and there were divine appointments that did not feel like they came from my hand, and that's that idea of people think you're being faux humble when you say things like that, like, well, I'm a vessel. But like that is what it is, dude. Like, yeah, I watched a billion movies. Yeah, I wrote a billion scripts. Yeah, I did stand up for no money. Yeah, I was a background actor before I had dialogue. Yeah, I scrapped my way improvising in tiny roles to then get bigger roles. I did all that work. I did work, but there were still so many things that felt dropped at my doorstep and inherited rather than earned. And I think that's the earthly riches of God, of like putting you in places that you couldn't normally trespass or enter. And I think that's where I would see a lot of the confirmation of God, where my first big movie role was a movie called Virginia. It didn't do very well, but it had plenty of talented people I learned from. And I made, I think I made like $10,000 in the span of 3-4 weeks. And, that's a big deal at any age, let alone being 23 years old and an absolute idiot trying to navigate your first movie. But the way I got that role was showing up to be a background extra. I saw the writer director Lance Black, who famously won the Oscar for writing the Harvey Milk movie for Sean Penn. I went up to him, just took 45 seconds to say, "Hey man, are you Dustin Lance Black?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I just wanted to say congrats on the movie. I love the film. It really moved me. And I love your speech at the Oscars when you said God doesn't hate gay people." And I got moved to tears. I thought, I'm a Christian. And when you said that, I thought that's something that really ought to be said more often. So thanks for doing that. No intention of anything to gain outside of saying that. To me, it was just neat and cool to meet a famous person and tell them I like your work. That was the conclusion for me. But he wrote my name down. He brought me back for 2 auditions, and I booked like the 6th biggest part in the movie. And I'm doing scenes with Ed Harris and Jennifer Connelly. So that felt like a God thing, for sure. When Clint Eastwood offered me Richard Jewell 7-8 months after I pitched myself to a creative executive at Fox to play Richard Jewell back when Jonah Hill was attached, to get that movie offer, I almost have to go back. And once again, I rant a little bit, and I'm so sorry. I just, what I'm trying to do is show you the lineage of God's handiwork in what otherwise would look like Paul nailed another role. No, what happened was in December of 2018, I was watching The Mule Christmas Day. On Christmas Day, I was watching The Mule, with the Clint Eastwood movie, with my family in theaters. That same day, Spike Lee sends me a script for The Five Bloods and offers me a part in the movie. Then while I'm shooting The Five Bloods in Thailand 4 months later, I get a call saying Clint Eastwood would like you to star in his Richard Jewell movie instead of Jonah Hill. So that alone is really weird, the Clint Spike connection. And also to mention, 7-8 months prior, I was in the office of a 20th Century Fox executive asking about the Richard Jewell movie. And I said, if Jonah ever drops out, I hope you'll consider me. And he was like kind of smirky, like, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Not mean, but casually dismissive, probably. And then here I was getting that call, not, hey, audition, but, hey, can you say no to other jobs? I need you for 2 months in Atlanta to play Richard Jewell. That's God. That's definitively God's allowance of grace and favor. Now, I worked to get to the point where I'd be capable of pulling that off, but I didn't weave or author that. That was God. And Clint basically said the same, hugging me while I was crying the last night of Richard Jewell's filming. He gave me a hug and said, you were born to play this part. And that's, my spirit kind of recognized that. And I think we're all born to do certain overall arcing acts, and then also specific divine appointed acts, kind of like, the way Hadassah became Esther. You have been called for this royal position at such a time as this. And I think we are all living in the at such a time as this is, if we pay attention and if we're driven to do what we feel called to do, you know.
Yeah, that's wow. I didn't know that had happened on the last night of filming. I think that's such a moving thing to have somebody that you like respect beforehand to do that to you.
It was, well, he just saw, I was really emotional, and Clint's such a tough guy.
Yeah.
And Clint's such a tough guy that dealing, you know, me blubbering in front of him was kind of embarrassing, but I couldn't help it. Like, you know, we had 4 or 5 takes left to go. It was me, Olivia Wilde, and Sam Rockwell. And I'm trying to be chummy and jokey, but there's this like lump, the way people have a lump in their throat. I felt a lump in my stomach, and then in my spirit, and then from the chest to the throat. And it was almost like when you know you're going to throw up and you have that the warm saliva, and you're like, well, I guess I'm puking today. I had that with my emotion where I was like, I'm going to vomit up a lot of tears and a lot of, you know, this is going to be bad. This is going to be an ugly cry, as they call it. And it was. And, you know, Clint was very sweet and said some really nice things that validated me, because if you think I show up to set every day super confident, you'd be wrong. There were mornings where I would be sipping a cold brew coffee in the front seat of the driver who's driving me. I'd be sitting in his truck, and they'd come up to, you know, almost open the door for me, these production assistants, and I would go, I just need 2 minutes. And I'd be blaring Hillsong or Kendrick Lamar or Elevation Worship or Chance the Rapper. I would have something bolstering me, and I'd be beating my chest like an athlete, like I was angry while sipping coffee, because I need some jolt that says you can star in a Clint Eastwood movie that is about a true story of a guy who died, and you're trying to honor him to his family who's still alive. That's terrifying. It's not like showing up on Kimmy Schmidt where I get to pick my nose and crack a few jokes. It's totally different.
Right.
So yeah, that, I mean, I really needed God's help when I was doing that, because I had to show up and really believe that I was worthy of that position and that I could pull it off. You know?
Yeah. I wondered if there's, and we've talked about this a little bit, but when you go from having supporting roles in movies like Virginia or I, Tonya, and then go from that to being the lead of a movie in Richard Jewell, like what did that process teach you, like as an actor? What's the difference between being a standout performer in individual scenes and then going from that to like having to carry a whole movie?
That's a good question. I think it taught me the methodology of taking one day at a time, to not over anticipate. Doesn't mean you don't prep or do your homework, but it means, you know, do not worry about tomorrow, for today has enough trouble of its own. And I think I had to look at each day and go, let's just focus on where I need to be emotionally today. Let's not look too forward. So that was helpful. And then I also think I learned how to be an on-set leader, that like, even when you're having a tough day, whether you didn't sleep the night before, you're having trouble with line memorization, you got an upsetting text from friends or family that's now bleeding into your thought process and hurting you creatively, that all has to be pushed through. And you still have to be the guy willing to hear the boom operator's own struggles and tragedy that he's talking about, because you've set up a vulnerable space for him to feel safe enough to talk. I still need to be available for the boom operator to talk about his sick kid, and I still need to be able to crack a joke with my co-stars who are wanting to show me a YouTube video or a tweet. Like, you have to wear multiple social based hats to kind of be readily available to all people. What's that verse in Hebrews? I was all things to all people to win as many as possible. I mean, that's kind of what you have to do when you're the lead on a film. Now, some people would disagree with me. I doubt Joaquin Phoenix was reading tweets with the boom operator, but I feel called to be that guy, because I want people to feel welcome and loved and seen, even when I'm busy. Almost like parenting. How do how do you do your work but still make time to throw the ball in the backyard or whatever. I'm always trying to co-manage those expectations and those personalities, you know.
Yeah, it kind of sounds, I mean, yeah, it sounds a little bit like ministry, like the different hats that you would have to wear as a pastor if you were leading a church.
And people in ministry ought to be paid a little more, like people in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But, such is our continual plight. Great is your reward in heaven, not in your Chase account right now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Paul, one thing that I've always admired about you, and I think and it's coming out, I believe, right now as we're talking, is just your admiration and your appreciation for film and also the people that make it work. From an early age, you were studying, and I felt like IMDb was your textbook. You know, you were poring over roles and what people's histories were and all that. How do you, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't, but do you feel like that appreciation and that love for what the industry does and what can be created there, do you think how does that serve you now today? Like, how did it help you early on, maybe make connections, but I just feel like you've always appreciated people. And I think that's something that just hasn't stopped since you were very young. So maybe you could just talk about your love for the industry in general.
Thanks. Yeah, I it's so funny you say IMDb. Yeah, that website, the Internet Movie Database, was a bit of like a weird little encyclopedia thing where like I was able to, if I liked something in a movie or a show, I was able to look up who to credit for me liking that thing, whether it was production design, casting, the score and music of the film, or the cast. You know, it was really influential for me to be able to archivally go back and look and see who does what. So understanding the jobs on a set, understanding who the real players are in Hollywood, and who the peripheral players are too, who show up and maybe do 4 scenes in a movie and are always brilliant and on point, but they're not making millions and they're not super famous, you know, character actors, if you will. So studying that allowed me to see what is my place in this world. And the dream version was always, I go to Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. I get a degree in filmmaking and acting, separate programs. I do stand-up comedy and make short films. I get on SNL. Getting on Saturday Night Live, I can do my short films as, you know, they're digital shorts while also bringing my voice of comedy into that world and my acting. Then after 5 to 7 years of SNL, I go do some movies, but also make my own movies like Rob Reiner, anything from a Spinal Tap to a Misery to A Few Good Men. That was like the dream. That was what I set into motion for myself. But I also knew if I only end up, you know, being the fat guy on a sitcom who walks into a scene and goes, he's got crumbs all over his shirt and he goes, yeah, I don't know who ate the donuts. And then everybody laughs. I would have been content with that. You're getting paid, you're being overpaid to tell jokes on television. So that still would have been a fun existence. But I always shot for the highest of what I could, you know, afford to aim for, because that's what I wanted. And I figured if I fell short of that, I would be just fine with whatever came my way. So yeah, I really appreciate what other people do in the film and TV space. I want to, as an aspiring director, I want to direct my own movies. It's important for me to know what those folks have to do and what they're up against and what they need from me. And I think that studying helped me when I take meetings, because, you know, watching a million interviews of actors and filmmakers on YouTube, watching Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton, reading books from Michael Caine and Sean Astin's, you know, biography and stuff. Those things became very influential for me to know what the heck I'm talking about or find a way to best communicate it. So I'm very hyper referential, and I'm always name dropping and referencing, but I'm doing it with purpose to kind of illustrate something. And I think that's helpful when you communicate both on set or just in a meeting with somebody.
So you've mentioned that you have some interest in writing and directing your own stuff one day.
Definitely.
So I imagine you've probably learned a lot about, like, just by being on set, and you've mentioned this too, that you're trying to study what you've seen. Is there anything, like, was there anything that really surprised you about what you learned about how the movie making process works or what a director does?
Yeah, so I've directed 3 short films, that all of which I wrote or co-wrote, and then acted in 2 of the 3. Put my own money into some of them, you know. So I've kind of wore a lot of those hats, and been able to experience, at least on a small scale, what that looks like, and what you're up against and what you're expected to do. I think being on professional sets, big ones, you learn a lot about communication, because you're trying to do so much with such a little period of time and so many people. Your prep work and your communication becomes everything. Um, Now that communication might also be an omission of communication, where you delegate things and you trust people and you let them do their work rather than micromanage creatively. That's important too, having the discernment to know when to speak up and when not to. So that's a big part of it. It's a guy like Spike Lee. It's a lot of just kind of marching orders, where he'll yell out to the crew and go, "Why is this tree still here?" And then somebody runs and grabs it. And to some, that might look like, "Ooh, what's his deal? Why is he yelling for the tree to be removed?" He might also be doing it because we're 3 seconds from calling action, and this is a very basic thing that should have been done that no one noticed. And of the 50 crew members, if nobody noticed the tree, that might be a problem. That might be indicative of some distraction or something worthy of, calling the conversation. And then someone like Clint Eastwood, he's been doing it for forever. And the people he works with, it's more about delegation and trust and working off purely instincts rather than, dissecting every little thing, which is also admirable. But then also, people can criticize that and say, well, this thing wasn't as good as it could have been because you only did 2 takes or something. So there's always going to be a back and forth on methodology. But what I've learned is prep prep is crucial. Communication, especially including that you and your collaborators are making the same movie. Um, there was a director that I was trying to attach this music video director, to a movie me and my buddy were writing. And when we took a meeting with him at this like diner, he said something where he was like, "Yeah, this road trip movie, it's like The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson." And I took a moment and I go, "No, this isn't like The Bucket List. This is more like Hal Ashby's film The Last Detail with Nicholson and Randy Quaid. This is darker than The Bucket List. This is like a weirdo dark road movie with 2 flawed people." So just like, even hearing that was a moment of me going, we're not trying to make the same movie. This should not happen. So you gotta find those things out through collaborative discussion. And I would say anyone listening or watching who wants to make their own film, start really, really small. There's that verse in the Bible too that says something akin to, "Do not despise the day of small beginnings." It's true, man. Like, you got to just do it and not expect it to be perfect, but know that your 3rd film is better than your 1st. Your 8th film will be better than the 3rd, and your 10th film might be a feature. So just keep, chugga, 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 chugga. You just got to keep doing it.
Yeah, Paul, actually, one of the things that they're launching this year is a short film competition for the festival. So you already gave a little bit of encouragement there. Any more advice you'd want to give to people that are thinking about taking that on?
Yeah, especially with short films and working with a shoestring, Little Caesars budget. I think it's wise to just utilize the things you have access to. If you have an uncle who lives 30 miles from campus and he has a Corvette or a really nice car or something, like, ask him if you can use it for 5 hours and shoot a scene where, if you have a wealthy character, it's more interesting if they're eating their hamburger from the front seat of their car. Um, if you know somebody who has like weird memorabilia collector things, like they have a comic book collection, make one of your characters a comic book collector, and you have free production design to let your buddy allow you to use 3 stacks of comic books in the background, or like, it's about getting creative with your peripheral, assets, and being able to utilize those things for storytelling. So craft your story around some of those things, but also tell a real story. Something I did really wrong, not wrong, but just not as well as it should have been, was a lot of my skits and sketches and short films early on. It was all, how can we be goofy? How can we be funny? How can I make somebody laugh? Those are worthy endeavors. But when you're telling a story, you got to tell a story. So start from a place of story. This character, it can be so simple too. Like Harold and Kumar is about guys who are like, we just really need to eat White Castle tonight. It's about more than that, but that's kind of the basis. That's the jumping off point. So your short film can be as brilliant as, my character needs to go to work, and as they're headed out the door, they stop and they go, they forgot their keys. Then they head out the door, and then as they're in their car, turning on their car, they're backing out of the driveway and they stop and they go, I forgot my name tag. They go back in to grab their name tag to put on their work shirt. Then as they're headed there, they realize, they look at their phone, they haven't checked their phone, and it says, their cell phone text says, you get a close up on that, and it says, where have you been? You were supposed to be here 45 minutes ago. And that person realizes, oh, I'm not 5 minutes late. I'm going to be an hour late. I thought I started at 10 a.m., not 9 a.m. And then by the time they get there and they're stressed out and they're trying to make up for it, and suddenly you're off the tripod and you're doing shaky cam as the guy or gal's rushing around, their boss says, can I see you in my office? And you have an Office Space moment where the person's talking about their performance and how it's been subpar, and that being late for work is just one of a million negative bricks they've built in this wall at their job. And as that person's talking and droning on, and we're only 5 minutes into the movie now, you have their dialogue cut out, and you just get a close up on that guy or gal going, and they look down and their name tag fell off their shirt, and they pick it up and they look at it and it says Brad, and they're like, something rubs them the wrong way, and they go, you know what? I gotta quit. I can't do this anymore. And they walk out, and it's like this interesting moment where the film began and it was all about Brad's gotta get to work. And when he gets there, he realizes, I gotta leave work. That's a story. It's not brilliant. I made it up on the spot. I'm not brilliant. But I know that you can make a good movie and tell a simple story in 5 minutes. Go do it.
I wanted to jump on the other festival part of the festival, and like a big theme of why this event exists basically is kind of considering content and context and what the benefits are of engaging with movies as a Christian with an open mind and an open heart. What have you found can be the benefits of engaging with movies from a Christian perspective, but keeping an open mind and heart?
I think one thing that becomes beneficial is trying to understand people you deem unlikable. So, if there is a violent character in a film and you're a Christian and you're like, I don't like this or whatever, you're also, the onus is on you to dissect that person and to try to figure out why they do what they do, rather than just assume that they're the Joker in Batman or the shark in Jaws. People are more complex than that. They're not just swinging mallets and pulling triggers because that's what they do. It's usually more complicated than that. So I think as a person of faith, I think empathy, not sympathy for the devil, but sympathy for the tortured, would be a really good place to land. And as an actor, I have to do that, where if I don't like a character I'm playing, I still have to love them and understand them to some degree. But also, what's interesting, I heard this quote the other day that I loved. They said, you can forgive a thief, but that doesn't mean you give them a key to your house. And, when you're playing a character, you have to forgive them and understand them, but you don't want it taking over you when you leave set either. So I try not to give my characters a spare key. I try to really divorce myself from those instincts. And it was tough. There was a character I played on a show called Kingdom, and it was a very tortured character, and I made it that way. It wasn't really on the page. I decided, between takes, I would flick my ear as if I was being bullied in a classroom setting. And the moment they yelled action, I would stop flicking my ear. But I felt the residue of the vibration of my ear and the slight pain. And I would put a rock in my shoe or a stick so that even when I was sitting, I was uncomfortable. And then I would punch my femur a little bit like a mild Charlie horse between takes because I wanted this, I'm not hurting myself, but I'm definitely uncomfortable. And I'm creating an emotional environment in which I never feel free or relaxed or at ease. So I had to keep that up. And then in season 1, I did a scene with this actor, Matt Loria, who's also a Christian man, wonderful Christian guy, did Friday Night Lights, a whole bunch of stuff. He and I did a scene where my character, I decided, and this is funny. Seth and I watched a movie called The Minus Man, which is not a great movie, where Owen Wilson plays a serial killer, I think. But Owen's dad in the film is played by the celebrated actor Brian Cox. And in the scene, there was a scene in the movie where he slaps himself. And I think Owen or somebody stops him like, "Dad, what are you doing? Like, you're hitting yourself." And Annette Bening did the same thing in American Beauty, where she smacks herself and goes, "Stop being a baby." So I did this thing where I was just like instinctually smacking myself in a really fired up scene between Matt and I. And on camera, it works great. And you can hear it and you feel it because you can hear it when you're watching it. I would have nights a year and a half later where if I got drunk and I was at a bar trying to make a point in a conversation, I'd catch myself smacking myself for emphasis and trying to tell someone something. And I didn't even know where it came from. It wasn't until it took years after to realize, like, oh, you didn't let go of that character. And maybe it's in the character because that smacking thing was emotionally inside of you and you're hurting and you're trying to be taken seriously or understood. And that just came out. So, like, I had to psychoanalyze that a little bit and realize that you have to be careful, the careful little eyes, what you see, little ears, what you hear, careful little actions that you take upon yourself, and be careful as to what you're allowing in your spirit. The same way that worship music can ignite your spirit, there's probably rap and metal music that invades your spirit, or pop music that does too. And there's probably conversations of people gossiping that gets in your spirit. It's almost like you don't know how messy the room is until you explore it and open the door. And that was a moment where I went, oh, there's some mess in here that I allowed in that I need to kind of work to get out of the room. So dark characters can do that. I can't talk about it yet because it's not announced, but I'm about to play basically the darkest character I've ever played in a project set up on a streaming service this spring and summer. I'm going into it with a ton of prayer support, and I'm going into it with a lot of intentionality of my relationship with Jesus every day, because I refuse to let that character rub off on me. As determined as I am to do a great job and play the role, I'm equally determined to not let it stay with me. And so I would say to actors, whether you're doing theater, whether you're doing movies, be careful what you let in, and find tools that are useful to keep that darkness at bay and not stay with you.
Wow. Yeah.
How's that for heavy?
It is. It's heavy. It's intense, man.
Yeah.
Since getting in LA, what's on, or Hollywood in general, what kind of temptations are there, but also what kind of positive influences maybe surprised you?
The biggest temptation is arrogance. By far. You're offered arrogance daily, not cocaine. You're also offered cocaine, which I'm glad I've never tried because I'm terrified of it. And I have no interest in ever trying something that's devastating. But yeah, I think when I was promoting Richard Jewell, December of 2019, I had the time of my life. Me and my good buddy Abby Davis, who's a Christian film producer and documentary guru. She and I have a saying where we said, free shrimp. You're not there to promote the movie. You're not there to be popular. You're there because they're serving shrimp and you're not paying for it. So, I had this attitude of free shrimp every time I went to a Hollywood function, and it made it fun. It made it unitinerant. It made it lots of fun, and it kind of took the piss out of it and pricked a hole in the balloon. It really took it out, and in a good way. But something happened in January, the month after January 2020, where I had enough people in my ear talking about the Oscars and opportunities and whatever. I think at some point Brad Pitt name dropped me on the red carpet with Variety. He told them he liked my performance, but some blending combination of all that stuff kind of got in my head, and this wave of expectancy and entitlement and sort of arrogance came over me. Now, I don't think everybody saw it, but I started to notice it, and that was the problem. And I really hated what that did to me. And it made it about something other than, holy crap, I'm in a movie and free shrimp, that's what I want. That's what I want. That's where I want to stay the rest of my life. But it takes work because people get in your ear, and you drive down Sunset Boulevard and all you see are billboards for everybody's shows and movies. But that's not reflective of the real world. That's it's an echo chamber, and it's a bubble, and you have to understand that. I think that's healthy. So the biggest temptation is arrogance, as well as I have friends who are like, "Why aren't you just having random sex with a ton of women? You're a famous actor now." And I'm like, I don't think that's good for my heart or my spirit. That's just not something I want to do nor have. And I can't relate to that. So there are those temptations of behavioral patterns, but the good things are self-discovery. They preach therapy out here. I've had a personal psychiatrist therapist who's been helping me work through some stuff the last 3 months, a guy out of UCLA who I'm so grateful for him. And another thing is, LA is all about inclusivity and, giving a voice to people who are transgender or don't vote the same way you do or whatever. And I figure, Christians have that same right as anybody else. So I'm not afraid to speak my truth or share the gospel or be who I am, because I in turn allow other people to do that themselves. And I think that's a healthy reciprocity, transactionally, that people need to be very keenly aware of. As a Christian, you don't have to agree with everything, but if you're not going to allow people a seat at the table, you probably shouldn't assume that you have a chair for the table as well. Because not everybody's a Christian. So you expecting everyone to live exactly the same way as you is pretty woefully unrealistic and a bit of a fool's errand. You'd be better off making friends with those people, even peripherally, learning from them, re-solidifying what you know to be true or believe, and then hoping that someday they tap you on the shoulder and ask about Jesus. I remember walking through the bar scene in what is it? Is Ann Arbor the MSU? No, East Lansing. We were bar hopping in East Lansing when I was in my early 20s, and there were people holding signs that said, repent. The enemy comes to seek, kill, and destroy, but at the same time, like, you'll have to give an account at the end of days when you die, and the Lord will test you on all your sins. Like, it was this weird melding where I almost didn't know who was Satan and who was Jesus based on the sort of pronounced ire within them and these, signs that say gay people are going to hell with flames. If you really believe that that is the best way to capture the hearts of people for Jesus, good luck. And that's not me harping on people. And God, Paul's become so leftist. I've become so Jesus, yo. And and I think God gives granular wisdoms that help us curb those actions. And so I don't know why I got on that tangent. I apologize, but but it has to do with what you learn in LA, what you learn in Hollywood. What are the temptations? What are the benefits? The benefits are I'm learning how to better love my neighbor as myself in some regard. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I'm going to jump back in again. I've been pretty quiet for the most part.
Yeah, Jake, what's the deal, dude?
I know. Sorry.
Come on, man.
I just have to say, I'm fascinated by this conversation. I'm so blessed by what you've shared with us here today. And just to kind of summarize, some of the threads that I'm hearing come out of this, I'm hearing about vocation. I'm hearing about being who God has called us to be. My co-creator, Heather Davis, shared a book with me a while ago. And in that book, one of the first chapters, the author writes, sometimes the life that I'm living is not the same as the life that wants to live within me. And that,
wow,
I'm hearing that so much in this conversation as I heard you talk about, playing the role that you were created to play. As I'm hearing Abby ask you questions and being who God's created her to be. And Seth, in the same sense, being connected to you. I very much appreciate that. And I think that this is going to be such a blessing to all those that hear it. So I'm really thankful for our time with you today. I want to be respectful of your time. We've had you for over an hour. And just to share, Paul said that in an email to me, Paul said that people would probably start falling asleep if we went over an hour and 15 minutes, which I don't think is true at all. But we want to be respectful of your time. So Paul, are there any parting words that you'd like to share with us or with the people listening before we let you go?
Yeah, I don't know the exact. Thank you for that. I don't know the exact makeup of. I don't know the exact makeup of who will be digesting this interview and this chat, but what I know to be true is there are people in your life who are going to inevitably make you feel like you can't do something. And you might be one of those people, you yourself. The verses of, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You should underline all. The verse that says, do not, have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. You should underline the word everywhere. We have a boundless God, and because you share the same spirit as the one that raised Jesus from the dead, that's what we believe. You gotta not put yourself in a box. You got to be able to look at yourself overweight with acne and say, I love this person. This person's beautiful. Jesus chose to die for this person. Because you would never think that about other people unless you're a mean person. You would never look at somebody with acne or a hunch in their back or the wrong social attire or a weight issue and judge them off that alone. You got to stop doing that to yourself. And you got to believe that whether you stem from the smallest city in the world or you're in a big pond to begin with, like a Chicago or a Orlando or LA or something, the world is the world is not as scary as the world wants you to believe it is. Hollywood is not as scary and big as it wants you to believe it is. If you have the Holy Spirit and you have a relationship with Jesus, you are scary. You are big because he is big and God is gangster. So if you want to do something, do not hold yourself back and assume, well, a guy like Paul Hauser can star in a Clint Eastwood movie because he's brilliant. Nope. Factually untrue. I started in a Clint Eastwood movie because I worked my butt off learning everything I had to learn. I immersed myself in everything I loved and felt called to. And one day, one day sitting depressed, actually alone on a bed in a hotel in Thailand, fighting off the whispers, the antagonistic whispers of the enemy. I got a phone call that said Clint Eastwood wants you to star in his movie, you know? So I say all this to say I did the work, but I'm literally I will never be more special than anybody who attempts this. But if you do a little and are faithful in a little, he's gonna put you over much. And the woman that touched the hem of his garment when he was on earth, he said, "Your faith has made you well." That is the most unarrogant thing Jesus could ever say. He didn't take credit for a miracle. He said, "Your faith has made you well." That is powerful. So let your ambition be great. Let your sweat equity be visible. And wait for your faith to make you well. And don't be surprised if it's a lot more well than you expected.
Well, I cannot possibly improve on where you just landed us, Paul. And just on a personal note, if you ever want to come preach for me, you have an open invitation. So
it might not go well. I might an F-bomb might just slip out amidst my aggressive love on those people. It'd be dicey to throw me in the pulpit, but yeah. I would love to come visit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the invitation is open, man. We love you. We thank you so much for sharing your story here today, being vulnerable, being exactly who God has created you to be. And you have been a gigantic blessing to the three of us, especially, but also to the Faith and Film Festival. So on behalf of Concordia Seminary, on behalf of the Faith and Film Festival planning team, on behalf of Heather Davis and myself as co-creators of this festival, thank you for making this a dream come true. And especially thank you from me, most of all. So thanks, Paul, for joining us.
Thank
and
you guys.
God bless. We will be praying for you as you continue to work and as you continue to bless other people with your life and with your acting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Love you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Take care, Paul. We love you.
Love you, buddy.